It's my privilege to invite Jane Cart to the bima to light Shabbat candles, and we turn to page 2. Yeah, but I get confused with the vowels. Jane Cart.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotov v'nevanu, v'hadru ner shel Shabbat.
Amen. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you. We turn now to page 24. And we will sing together Shalom Aleichem. This prayer, as you can see from the bottom, is a prayer that tells us that we're singing to 2 angels that accompany each person home from the synagogue as Shabbat begins. And so we want them to be pleased with our Shabbat preparations, and so we put on our nice clothes and we light Shabbat, we make our house nice, and then the angels are happy, and then they say, you should have the Shabbat, the same nice, beautiful Shabbat next week. So we sing this beautiful song to them, Shalom Aleichem. Shalom Now, I thought that rather than me singing all the Kabbalat Shabbat psalms, I would just talk a little bit about them. And so we're going to just have a brief introduction to the Kabbalat Shabbat psalms, and then we're going to read a couple of them. So the Kabbalat Shabbat is the first part of the service. It means literally to welcome or to receive Shabbat, to welcome or to receive Shabbat. The Talmud teaches that as Shabbat drew near, our ancient rabbinic sages would get dressed in their finest clothing, and they would go out to one another, and they would say to one another, "Let us go out to greet the Shabbat queen." 1,000 years later, the Kabbalists of Savat embellished the Talmudic custom by actually walking out into the fields to welcome the incoming Shabbat. And it was there in Sfat that the Kabbalat Shabbat, welcoming Shabbat service, was first formulated, and from there it spread to all over the Jewish world. The point was that Jews regarded Shabbat as a queen, as something holy and something beautiful that brought majesty into their midst, and that it was their privilege to usher her in. So you kind of have to imagine these Jews who weren't wealthy, who didn't have a lot. For them to put on their finest clothing and to put their finest meal on the table, that's a lot, right? That is a big welcome and a big honor to Shabbat. So Kabbalat Shabbat has 6 psalms, and those are from 95 to 99 in 29. And the theme of the psalms is that God is the master, God is the ruler of the universe. And in fact, on Shabbat, we or Shabbat, I should say, testifies that God created heaven and earth in 6 days and rested on this day, which is why we have this day of rest for ourselves. So 6 psalms, some people say one for each day of creation, and then we end with Lecha Dodi, and that one greets the incoming queen of Shabbat, and that's when we rise to greet Shabbat. So this is all as a welcome. So one of the things that I thought would be interesting is to read a psalm or two in English, because we never do that, and sometimes we don't necessarily have understanding of what the psalms mean or why we're singing, for example, Shir Chadash. We have this like sort of campy, fun version of Shir Chadash, right? But what it actually is, a new song, is a new song for the Messianic age. That in the Messianic age there will be a new song. And then in fact, Shabbat is sort of a foretaste, a little glimpse into what a perfect world could look like, where there's equality, where there's rest for all, where there's peace, where there's quiet. This day is like a way to sort of glimpse into that future world that as progressive Jews we understand is our job to help to bring about. So Shiru Ladonai Shir Chadash, when the sing a new song to God, Shiru Ladonai Kol Haaretz, that the whole world will be singing this song. This would be in a messianic time. So let's look at page 14 and read read this psalm together in English, 96, and see how that feels to us. We'll read together. Sing to Adonai a new song. Sing to Adonai all the earth. Sing to Adonai, bless God's name. Proclaim God's victory day after day. Tell of God's glory among the nations, God's wondrous deeds among all peoples. For Adonai is great and much acclaimed. God is held in awe by all divine beings. All the gods of the peoples are mere idols, but Adonai made the heavens. Glory and majesty are before God. Strength and splendor are in God's temple. Let the heavens rejoice and the earth exult. Let the sea and all within it thunder. The fields and everything in them exalt. Then shall all the trees of the forest shout for joy at the presence of Adonai, for God is coming. For God is coming to rule the earth. God will rule the world justly and its people in faithfulness. And so we'll just do one more. On page 16, this is from Psalm 98, and it's another one of a new song. So there's another vision of what the world, a perfected and perfect world would look like. On the bottom, page 98. A psalm. Sing to Adonai a new song, for God has worked wonders. God's right hand, God's holy arm, has won God victory. Adonai has manifested God's victory, has displayed God's triumph in the sight of the nations. God was mindful of God's steadfast love and faithfulness toward the house of Israel. All the ends of the earth beheld the victory of our God. Raise a shout to Adonai, all the earth. Break into joyous songs of praise. And then it goes on to talk about how all the instruments will be used and all of creation will sing to God. So I think that's not something that we necessarily capture when we are singing just a couple of lines of each of the psalms. So the Lecha Dodi comes to Kabbalat Shabbat comes to a big peak at Lecha Dodi, and we turn to page 20. And Lecha Dodi was written, as you can see at the bottom of the page, it was composed by Shlomo Halevi Alkabetz, who was a Kabbalist in the 16th century in Tzvat. And he put his name in the psalm by the first letter of every paragraph. So his name was Shlomo, so in the first line, Shemor is a shin, and then the lamed from verse 2. See how it does that? So he put his name right in there, Shlomo Halevi. And then the last one is not included. So that's 1 through 8. And then on the last one, on verse 9, it's we welcome in Shabbat, we rise, we turn towards the door, and we welcome in this royalty. And you can just sort of imagine, as I said before, like these traditions come from people who didn't have the kind of lives that we have today. And for them, Shabbat was a time to eat a piece of white bread instead of a piece of coarse rye bread, which of course we love the rye bread, right? But for them, to have a piece of challah was such a treat and that they saved up all week for it. So we're going to attempt in the key of Sharon, Lechado D, on page 20. To help. Please take a few moments to wish one another Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Anytime it gets too high. On page 22, we continue with Psalm 29. Psalm 92, which we call this Mizmor Shir L'Yom HaShabbat, which we call the Psalm for Shabbat. We're going to do Ma Gadlu, Ma'asecha Adon Yah, which is 4 lines up from the indented part. on page 26. Yitkadal v'yitkadash Shemei Rabbah, B'yama divrachu te v'yamlich malchute, B'chayechon uv'yomechon, uv'chaye d'chol Beit Yisrael. Bagala, bagala, uv'izman kariv, v'maru, amen. Yehei Shmei Rabbah mevorach, Le'olam Ome'al Maya, Yitbarach, Yitbarach, V'yishtabach, V'yitpa'ar, V'yitraman, V'yitnasa, V'yitadar, V'yitala, V'yitalal, Shmei D'Kudasha, Brirku, Le'ela Mikol Birchata V'shirata, Tushbichata V'nechamata, Damiran V'yama, V'yimru, Amen. Please rise for the Baruch Hu and body your spirit. Page 28. Baruch Hu et Adonai HaMevorach. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bidvaro ma'ariv aravim b'chochma poteach she'arim uvitvuna meshana itim machalif et hazmanim umisader et hakochavim b'mishmerotehem barakia kertzono borei yom v'layla golel or mipnei choshech v'choshech mipnei or uma'avir yom umevi layla Umavdil ben yom uvein laila, Adonai tzvaot shemo. Achai v'kayam tamid yimloch aleinu leolam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai hama'ariv aravim. This is from Alden Salavi. It's called Gravity and Light. Torah is gravity, binding us to our ancestors, holding us near to our God, anchoring us with wisdom and understanding. Torah is gravity, tying our lives to our history and our destiny. Mitzvot are light, illuminating our path, brightening our days, showing us the way to holiness and service, leading us to heal the world. Mitzvot are light, shining around us with beauty. Torah is gravity. May your feet never falter. Mitzvot are light. May your hands shine with grace. Gravity and light surround us. Torah and mitzvot enliven us. Blessed are God's gifts. Page 34. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Baruch Shem Kivod Malchuto, Le'olam Va'ed. May we sing. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha uv'chol nafshecha uv'chol meodecha v'hayu hadvarim ha'ela asher anochi mitzavacha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibartam v'shivtecha b'veitecha uv'lechtecha v'derech Ushachbecha uvkumacha, ukshartam laot al yadecha, v'hayu letotafo b'neinecha, uktavtam amizuzo beitecha uvisharecha. V'ma'an tiskuru v'asitem ekol mitzvotai, v'item kedoshim Elohechem. Ani Adonai Elohechem, asher hotzeiti etchem Meretz Mitzrayim, v'hiyot lachem Elohim, Ani Adonai Elohechem. On the top of page 39. Standing on the parted shores of history, We still believe what we were taught before ever we stood at Sinai's foot, that wherever we go, it is eternally Egypt, that there is a better place, a promised land, that the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness. And together we read that there is no way to get from here to there except by joining hands, marching together. On page 40, Michamocha. V'ne'amar ki fada Adonai Yaakov, ugalo miyad chazak mimenu, Baruch atah Adonai, Ga'al Yisrael. On page 42 is Hashkivenu. Read together with me in English on page 42. Grant, O God, that we lie down in peace and raise us up our guardian to life renewed. Spread over us the shelter of your peace. Guide us with your good counsel. For your name's sake, be our help. Shield and shelter us beneath the shadow of your wings. Defend us against enemies, illness, war, famine, and sorrow. Distance us from wrongdoing. For you, God, watch over us and deliver us. For you, God, are gracious and merciful. Guard our going and coming to life and to peace evermore. We think of our family, our friends, our loved ones who are in need of healing on this Shabbat, healing of body, healing of spirit. We hold them in our hearts. Ira Altshuler, Howard Bregman, Kathleen Bond, Fern Diamond, Phyllis Didion, Anne Fay, Judy Forrest, Ken Franklin, Piers Haggard, Aryaman Harlalka, David Mordechai HaKohen, Linda Jube, Naum Kaplan, Carol Kaufman, Sylvia Kasparowski, Al Camper, Lee Kramer, Albert Lepre, Susan Lowler, Hinda Sarabat Khanapuro, Sophie Matiash, Joanne Mandel, Jonathan Miller, Edward Mims, Joanne Newman, Sanford Oaks, Lev Podorovsky, Naftali Ben Riva, Helen Faye Rosenblum, Mike Rosen, Peter Rosenfeld, Adam Schusterman, John Spear, Bill Stein, Jan Stoller, Jackie Student. Are there other names from Misha Barrett today? Yishaberach Avotenu v'Imotenu Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov Sar Rivka Rachel Leah Yivarech Yirapeh et HaCholim. May the one who blessed our ancestors Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, bless and heal all those who are ill. Baruch atah Adonai haporei sukat shalom aleinu v'kol amo Yisrael v'al Yerushalayim. Bless you, Adonai, guardian of Israel. The shelter of peace is spread over us, over all your people Israel, and over Jerusalem. On page 44, V'shamru, and we acknowledge our covenantal relationship with God through Shabbat. This is our covenant for all time, to keep Shabbat. turn to the tefillah on page 46. Please rise in body or spirit as you're able. Of the tefillah through page 62. You may stand or be seated as you choose. Well, I can talk much better than I can sing, so. Last week, I invited you to participate in the ancient tradition of counting the Omer, of counting the days, the 49 days between Pesach and Shavuot. Talked a little bit about the idea of focusing on the opportunities and blessings in one day, that one day in which we find ourselves. So by naming that day, by counting that day, just thinking about what it is about that one day. Several of you have let me know that you are starting this ritual and finding it meaningful and enriching, and I'm very glad and grateful to hear that and to know that. So today I pick up that thread of counting our days, and concentrate on a day from this past week, which was day 12, Thursday, which was Yom HaShoah v'Hagvura. Yom HaShoah, as we most commonly hear it, was established as an Israeli day. It's specifically Jewish day in recognition of the Holocaust. The first conversations on how to appropriately commemorate the Holocaust were held among the survivors of themselves, soon after liberation in 1945, and they centered on dates commemorating the experiences of the Warsaw Jewish community, which is the largest community of Jews in Europe. On December 28th, 1949, so a couple of years later, the first Holocaust Remembrance Day took place in Israel, where they reinterred Jewish remains, moved from the Flossenburg camp near Munich to a crypt in a Jerusalem cemetery. From that first observation of the date, other Israeli commemorations periodically occurred, though there was no consensus on which date to commemorate the Holocaust, because it was every day for so many years. So how do you pick a date? So in 1951, the Knesset, or the Israeli parliament, designated the 27th day of Nisan as Holocaust Remembrance Day. That date was chosen to coincide with the anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and the name, Yom HaShoah v'Hagvura, Day of Remembrance of the Shoah, and then that last word, Gevura, I'm going to just right now sort of leave it untranslated, but I'll talk about it in a little bit, but it could be understood as strength, Gevura, strength, or bravery, or heroism. So the Day of Remembrance of the Shoah and Gevura, strength, or strength. So that day, Yom HaShoah v'Hagvura pays tribute to Jewish lives lost in the Holocaust and to the heroism of European Jews, specifically from the Warsaw Ghetto, but not only from the Warsaw Ghetto. And then this date, the 27th day of Nisan, was made official in Israeli law in 1959. There is another day of Holocaust remembrance, which some of you may know about. It's called the International Holocaust Remembrance Day. That is a newer holiday. Holiday is a hard word to use, but it's a newer commemorance day. It was established by the United Nations in 2005, and that day remembers all 11 million murdered in the Holocaust. So 6 million Jews, and then the 5 million others who were murdered in the Holocaust. The UN chose January 27th, which was the day Auschwitz was liberated by the Red Army in 1945. So it's January 27th. So while we sometimes translate Shoah, so Yom HaShoah, as Holocaust, and I've been saying the words sort of interchangeably, they actually do have very different meanings. Shoah is Hebrew, and it has its biblical root in the expression Shoah u'Meshua, which is found in the book of Job. And if you hear it, you can hear that the word is sort of doubled. And usually when a word is doubled, it's like it's strong, you have to pay a spend. It's like saying something twice. And that phrase in the book of Job is translated by Robert Alter, which is a poetic translation, and it's beautiful. The darkness of desolate dunes. The darkness of desolate dunes. But we would more literally translate it, I said, as like a double desolation and desolateness, if there is such a word as desolateness. Desolation and desolateness. The word Holocaust comes from the Greek for burnt offering, because that is a burnt offering, something burnt all the way up. But that word has come to be used with reference to large-scale slaughter or destruction. Not necessarily just a Jewish, you could say a Holocaust and not mean the Jews. So Shoah refers to the systematic and systemic targeted extermination of 6 million Jews in Europe. So I'd like to talk about one. And actually this woman didn't die in the Shoah. Her name is Vanda, and I'm sure I won't say her name right, Obidikova. And she lived in Mariupol, Ukraine. And some of you might have heard about her. This is her story. When German forces occupied Mariupol in October of 1941, Vanda avoided capture by hiding in a basement. The Nazis rounded up the city's Jewish population, including her mother, who was taken and shot, along with everyone else in her mother's family. Nazi forces killed between 9,000 and 16,000 Jews on the outskirts of Mariupol in 1941. Her father, Vanda's father, who was not Jewish, managed to get his 10-year-old daughter, Vanda, admitted to a hospital where she spent 2 years because the Nazis were convinced she was somehow Greek and not Jewish. And she was liberated by the Soviet army in September of 1943. Vanda Obidkova died on April 4th, 2022, that's 25 days ago, in a freezing cold basement, without water or electricity, during the Russian siege on her city. So she survived in a basement, and she died in a basement. She was 91, and she was described as a kind and joyous woman. Zichrona livracha, may her memory be for a blessing. So it is Shabbat, a day on which we do not mourn. So I'm going to move quickly to the second half of the name of this day that we're talking about, day 12 of the Omer, Yom HaShoah, and focus on the V'hagvura part. So Yom HaShoah is the remembrance of the Shoah. And this Gevurah, we just said the Gevurot prayer, and in that we talk about God's strength. And sometimes in this case, we're talking about strength or bravery, that kind of strength. And most of the time when we talk about the day, we just talk about Yom HaShoah. We don't even talk about Yom HaShoah V'Hagvura. And that is a shame because the day is meant also to commemorate the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising and the strength and bravery of the resistance, not just of them, but of all the people who showed strength and resistance. There's an article online called Honor Moments of Resistance on Yom HaShoah. It was written by Shira Diener, and she describes some of the bravery of the Jews who resisted and even rose up against Nazi tyranny. So just a few things. There are stories of photographers like Henrique Ross, who risked his life to document the devastating conditions and brutality of the Lodz ghetto. And if you go to the Holocaust Memorial Museum in DC, you can see all these photos from that ghetto. There are the stories of the sophisticated underground resistance that distributed news and information to warn others, and sometimes is amazingly clever, brilliant ways of communicating. There were the armed militias known as the Jewish partisans that fought against the Nazis and sort of survived in the forests. Then there were those who knew the end was near in the Warsaw Ghetto and rose up not so much to escape, but to resist, sending the message that they would not go quietly. The author of this article, Diener, reminds us, these acts left us with stories of courage, of people holding on to their identity when their identity was the very thing they were being persecuted for. Yom HaShoah V'Hagvura charges us with more than just the responsibility to remember, that's just the first part, those who are lost. As important as that is, it is also a call to honor the inspiring acts of bravery that sprung forth from the hatred, violence, and despair that was thrust upon millions of people. To honor the inspiring acts of bravery. In this week's Torah portion, Acharei Mot, we read about the ritual at the source of the term scapegoating. It's a Yom Kippur ritual of atonement. As part of a communal atonement ritual, the high priest would confess the sins of Israel while placing his hands on a goat, which was then sent out into the desert. The positive side of this ritual is that it takes the burden of a person's errors and sins off their shoulders and allowing them to feel better, to feel freed, right? So you can imagine that, well, we think of things that we do on Yom Kippur so that we feel freed of our sins, right, that are on our shoulders. In this case, the scapegoat comes from putting all those sins on this poor goat and sending it off into the wilderness. And I don't know if you know how much I love goats, but I go see them all the time in the park. The negative aspect of scapegoating, as we understand it today, as we use the term today, we talk about scapegoating, is that someone, and usually the wrong person or persons, is blamed for whatever has gone wrong. And in fact, scapegoating is one of the tragedies of the Shoah and of anti-Semitism in general, in that Jews are blamed for whatever someone wants to blame us for. The opposite of scapegoating is holding ourselves accountable for what we've done. And we don't put it on someone else, to hold ourselves accountable for what we've done. The world is broken in many places, but we are responsible neither for all the brokenness nor for standing up against all of it. But we must hold ourselves accountable for some of it, both the breaking and the fixing, and that is up to us to determine what we're to hold ourselves accountable for. So my takeaway from day 12 of the Omer, Yom HaShoah v'Hagvura, and from the Torah portion of day 14, Acharei Mot, is to recall the horrors of the Shoah and, at the same time, to find the strength of the Gevurah, to assert my own agency to stand up against the injustices confronting us today, the ones that I can. And I invite you to do that as well, because if you stand up for some injustices and I stand up for some other ones, then we have a really good chance of conquering them. Shabbat Shalom. So I'd like to count the Omer now, and that is in our book. I know it's in here. Sorry, I didn't put it in the outline, so I need to look it up. Oh, page 278. Hineni muchana muzumna lekayam mitzvat aseh shel tzvirat haomer baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al sfirat haomer hayom arba'a asar yom shehem shnei shavuot laomer. Today is the 14th day, which is 2 weeks of the Omer. Go back to singing with Aleinu on page 282. Please rise in body or spirit as you're able. That is another reference to the Messianic time on that day. God's name will be one. Please remain standing. Kaddish is on page 294. We think of our loved ones whom death has recently taken from us. James Jimmy Goldman, Dr. Jerome Hantman, Janet Kreisman, Agnes Roche, Summer Oberauer, Neil Smaller. We also remember those who died at this season in years past and whose yahrzeit is observed on this Shabbat. Norman Americus, Shirley Bilder, Milden Mickey Blank, Myrna Blank, Audrey Botkin Roth, Morris M. Bronstein, Zachary Kaplan, Charles Dechter, Jerome B. Feingold, Lois Finkel, Sylvia Fisher, Clarence Gordon, Jack Julius, Margaret Kessler Levine, Fred Kovacs, Dr. Norman I. Levinson, James Matthew Lewis, Frene Morgan, Ruth Ostro, Raymond Recht, Rita Rosenson, Martin Sacknoff, Philip Sattenstein, Janet Z. Schindler, Julius Svarti, Kenny Silverblatt, Leonard J. Singer, Meyer Sonis, Roland Stone, Rose Sugarman, Howard M. Swartz, George Teplitz, Dorothy Schwartz, Uniton, Betty Verbowski, Lois Weaver. We also remember the 4 students killed at the Kent State shootings on May 4th, 1970, Allison Krauss, Jeffrey Miller, Sander Scheuer, and William Schroeder. Other names for Kaddish tonight? Zikronam livracha, may all their memories be for blessing. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah, v'yalma divrach yurtei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayachon uvyomechon, v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, b'galau v'zman kari v'imru amen. Yehei shmei rabbah mevarach le'olam olmei almaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitraman v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei dekudashah b'richu. Leila min kol birchata v'shirata, tishbechata v'nechamata, damiran b'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shmaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. You may be seated. We have food tonight as you're leaving. We have to-go oneg kiddush every Friday and Saturday now after services in the Aaron Courtyard. It's probably going to change, but right now it's to-go, but I believe that you can sit and eat it here if you'd like to. On May 20th, the Women of Rodef Shalom Brotherhood and JJEP are hosting the Shabbat service that night. It's still at 5:30. It will be followed by dinner, and more information will be posted in upcoming communications. On June 3rd, we'll be having our picnic. It was originally publicized at a different date, but so the service for the Women Rodef Shalom Brotherhood and JJEP is May 20th, and the picnic will be June 3rd. And again, that will be more information coming. The plant sale, Rodef Shalom Preschool plant sale is happening now. You can still put orders in between now and May 6th. There's a link in the Shalomogram, and pickups are May 15th. And if you have questions, you can call Mimsy Layton. There's herbs and some, I think, tomatoes and peppers and a bunch of different kinds of flowers. So I'd like to thank Jane and Miranda and Dawn for making everything in my key. And That was not, you think that was easy? That was not easy. And all of you for being here tonight and for celebrating Shabbat together. We are going to close with Adon Olam on page 321. Kiddush is on page 5. Too bad it's grape juice. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kichanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu, b'shabbat kodsho b'ahava uvratzon, hinchilanu, zikaron l'maaseh v'reishit, ki hu yom techila, l'mikra'e kodesh, zecher l'tziat Mitzrayim, kivanu v'charta, v'yotanu kidashta, mikol hamim, v'shabbat kodshecha, v'yahava uvratzon, hinchaltanu, baruch atah Adonai, mekadesh ha-shabbat.
Amen.
What?
I said not matzah.
No matzah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz.
B'te'avon.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Please come get some challah. Please return your prayer books. Please come say hi. What time is it?
I don't know. I can go find out.
Here. Hold on. Let me get some more.